Great. Thanks everybody for joining. I'll launch in a little bit about myself. So I'm born and raised in Idaho, and I love the outdoors. This was just taken like last month, and I love to rock climb as well. So I love everything about Idaho. Here's some of my credentials. Probably the most important would be Certified Scrum Professional, which means I'm a certified Scrum Master, certified Scrum Developer, and Product Owner. And I'll walk through our story on our Agile journey. I'd love to have your questions and ideas at any time. So I'm following the chat. If you guys want to throw a question in chat, if that doesn't get my attention, raise your hand inside Zoom, or you can, or just shout out. But I can take any type of questions at any time. So I want to launch a poll. Oop. All right. Does that poll show up for all of you? So go ahead and, all right, they're coming in.
You might want to just recap the poll too, so it shows up through the YouTube video as well, if you don't mind.
Oh, yes. Thanks, David. So the question is, what are you running in your projects? Are you running Scrum, Kanban, Scrumban, your own experiment, or no process at all? So those are the questions. All right. Looks like we got 22 of 25. So I'm going to end the poll. All right. I'll share the results out. Are you guys seeing those poll results?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So a lot of Scrum. Great. A lot of Scrum. All right. I'm going to stop sharing that.
And just for YouTube viewers too, that's 86% identified with Scrum, 0 with Kanban, 0 Scrumban, 5% with your own experiment, and also 9% with no process.
Great, thanks, David. All right, so here's a couple questions for all of you today. Given the current COVID-19 work from home situation, have your processes moved online? Have your processes changed? Or do your processes need to change? And as David and I were talking earlier, after COVID-19, will your processes go back to what they were, or will they change going forward? So let me launch into our story. And we have quite a few folks on the line from In Time Tech, and Paul Remus, he's our Senior VP of Business Development. So feel free to call out things from your side, Paul, and anybody else on the phone from In Time Tech. If you want to add, I'd love to have your contribution. So In Time Tech, we are a software development and product company based in Meridian. We have about 60 of us there in the Meridian office, and about 450 developers in India. We specialize in web apps, mobile apps, embedded development, QA, automated test, DevOps, data science, and cybersecurity. Let me just arrange. So our story goes back to, or at least my story within Time Tech goes back to 2013. That's when I joined. At that time, we had about 5 projects going on. We were geographically dispersed teams in the US, India, and Europe. And at that time, our processes were not bringing the value we needed. A lot of them were in disarray, disorganized. We were having difficulty visualizing our work, excuse me, and organizing our work. We needed somebody to focus on process. And we were at that period of time in our company. We had started in 2009. We're at that point where we had been through some whitewater, some growing pains. And these projects that started up, and we had a lot going on. We were probably in what we would call whitewater today as a startup. And so in the whitewater phase, the next process and the next step in your development is process. And so somebody naturally fills that role of processor. And so that landed upon me as my opportunity to do that. And as I came in, that's what I focused on. And I had some experience at HP doing that. We had cut our teeth starting in 2005 with Agile. We had started with Scrum. We had done Agile development. We had done continuous integration, delivery, automated testing, and DevOps. And so I had some experience. What we did was we chose a book, Essential Scrum by Kenneth Rubin. And that led to a book reading club that I led. And that was on Skype back in those days. It was a little rough virtually, but we made it work. And we launched through each chapter and discussed like, how could we take advantage of these processes to organize ourselves? We started to organize our projects and backlogs in Jira, which is a pretty common tool used today. It's all online. What resulted was a lot of peace and a lot of order. We were able to visualize our work and also estimate and predict and respond to change. Today, we have about 500 software developers in our company, and the vast majority of our projects are running in Jira. And I'm not out here to promote Jira. You get to choose your tool. Jira has worked well for us, and a little bit. So this is part of our story. So with Jira, we don't have one Jira administrator. I led the charge with standing up Jira, teaching everybody how to use it, but it's pretty much self-administered by our Scrum Masters. They learn for themselves what they need to do in Jira, and they configure their own projects in Jira. We run a myriad of Scrum, some Kanban, and a lot of variations as well. So what I wanted to launch into today is the differences between Scrum, Kanban, and Scrumban, and then any variations from that. One of the things that also moved the needle in our company when we all learned Scrum together is we asked all of our leads, our project managers, to go and become certified Scrum Masters. That was a training, that was the vehicle for training that allowed them to understand the processes and then lead out on adapting those for their teams. That was very successful in bringing a lot of order to our projects and our teams. I think the last time I had done this was about 4 years ago. I used to run Scrum Audits throughout all of our projects. And that was just simply a questionnaire that I would send to all of our Scrum Masters project managers. And I asked them to check off what they were doing, what they were not doing, and what they wanted to improve upon. And then we'd meet and we'd review that. That doesn't happen today. We found that that's not necessary anymore, that we're all self-leading our own Scrum teams or our Kanban teams. And so this is a part of an evolution in our development of our company. And also as we work with other clients, we have about 25 clients and 50 different projects going on at one time. We will, as we augment capacity for our clients, we work with them and with their processes. We don't come in and dictate process, but we come in as a partner to see where we can collaborate and improve the process. And so a lot of times it's the process that our clients run, and also we are bringing up ideas and retrospectives to bring a better result to the project. So let me launch into Scrum and Kanban and Scrumban. And also with this caveat. So you'd say that I did lead the charge in our company as an agile advocate. That was needed at that time. I was that process person. But also at the same time, I was not what some might call the Scrum police. I was a Scrum advisor. And so I did not issue out any Scrum tickets, any citations. I would not say, well, that's not Scrum, but I'd have a conversation instead to say what's working, what's not working, and how can we get there. And so in all of this, you might in this agile transformation of so many in the industry, they have adopted Scrum, and you'll run into some that are very staunch advocates. And for those people, when they take a hard line and a hard interpretation, there's a Scrum guide that Sutherland and Schwaber have produced. Their last update was in 2017. And it's a guide or a framework, and it's meant to be that. When you take a strict interpretation of those things, then things start to break down and people start to lose interest. So from this agile movement that's happened over the last several decades, other processes have come out, Kanban and Scrumban. And so this is your opportunity to choose what you want to use for your project. Scrum essentially is best for product development and software development. So when you have a set of requirements that you know of to start, and you want to work in iterations, but change happens, and responding to that, embracing that change. Scrum is best suited for that, and that's why we do a lot of Scrum in our company. Kanban is best suited for production support or maintenance projects, and we do some Kanban as well, where we have a support team taking in tickets, requests from customers, and responding to those. And then Scrumban is a mix of both, Kanban with some Scrum in it, and then also there's variations of that as well, and it's up to you for what you want to choose. Scrum is an organization of teams in these small cross-functional self-organizing teams. That's what the Scrum guide calls for. You have a small list of concrete deliverables split into fixed iterations, usually 1 to 4 weeks, with a potentially shippable product or code demonstrated after each iteration, and then potentially released to your customers. Based on insights gained by inspecting the release after each iteration, optimizing your release plan, and optimizing your process by having a retrospective after the end of each iteration. I really like this visual because this highlights Scrum in a visualization, where we have product owner over here on the left is visualizing, coming up with the requirements, what they want to do, directing the work to be done, directing what is to be done, not the how, but the what, organized in a product backlog, and prioritize. So feature A is the highest priority, then feature B and feature C. And then in sprint planning, that's when those items are picked from the backlog, and then they are chosen. And then the team, which is this group of people right here, that's when they enact upon those features to develop the right code, develop your product. Scrum Master leads the process, and that's the Scrum Master, this person. It's right here. And he's organizing the process, he or she. And then sprints are executed we typically do 2-week sprints, and we meet in a daily Scrum to talk about what's been done. And then at the end, we might have a shippable product increment. We might ship some code at the end of the iteration, or we might choose not to. And then we review what has been done to see if we want to ship that item, that code, and then we have a retrospective. This is the Scrum guide that I was talking about. It's on scrumguides.org, and provides the purpose, the definition, describes what the Scrum team is all about and the roles, and the events, the ceremonies, like the sprint, the planning, the daily scrum, the review, or respective artifacts, product backlog, sprint backlog. Now, if you're embarking in Scrum, this is a great place to start, is this Scrum guide, or the book that I'd mentioned before, Essential Scrum, because it talks about all of these in detail. The Scrum guide is pretty brief, and books like Essential Scrum launch more into definitions and examples. All right, now I'm transitioning into Kanban. Kanban is a lighter. Let me just talk about what doesn't work for Scrum for some. So Scrum talks about 5 to 7. I'll go back here. 5 to 7 on a team, cross-functional team, and in co-located is what they say, like the same building, the same location. That doesn't work for a lot of arrangements. Some are small teams, 2 or 3. Some are larger teams, 20 to 30. Some are not in the same building. And so that's where this variation, this experimentation can come in. Say you don't need a Scrum Master, or don't want a Scrum Master. Nobody wants to fill that, or perhaps it's not needed. So Kanban is a lighter weight process where you still want to visualize the work in a backlog and in a board. You split the work into pieces, you write it on a card, and then put it on the wall, if you will. And that could be a physical wall, or it could be a virtual wall. It could be like in Jira, or some other tool, Scrum tool, Kanban tool that you choose. And you have these named columns that illustrate each work in this workflow. And you want to limit your work in progress. Have these explicit limits to how many can be in each state. That there's been a lot of studies that have shown that someone cannot handle more than 2 tasks at the same time. And if they do, productivity starts to suffer. So you can assign these WIP, work in progress, limits to how much people in your team take on. And you can measure the lead time, or maybe the cycle time is also called, to optimize that process so that you can be as small and predictable as possible. Kanban is based upon these 3 principles: visualize the work you do today in this workflow, limit the amount of work in progress, and enhance the flow. When something's finished, move on to the next highest thing in your backlog. And this is a good visual of an example of a Kanban board. And this could be Post-its, or it could be a tool. So on the left, you see this backlog of items. As soon as something comes in, perhaps it's a ticket, a support request, a feature to be developed. Then you write up the card, you put it in the backlog, and then people on your team will pull from that backlog to pull it in progress. And see the little 3 there? That means only 3 items can be in progress at a time by your team. And then the next phase would be peer review the work being done, and then in test. And there's also limits, work in progress limits tiers. Only 3 things can be done in peer review at a time, only 1 in test. And those are completely up to you on how you want to set your process. Now, say a hot item comes in, an emergency, a customer is down, like they're blocked, they can't even go any further. So what do you do? Well, the team can adapt to that. They can pull that in right away. They can stop what they're doing and pull that in depending upon the priority. Kanban allows for that. And then when you're done, you move it into a done column, and then perhaps you have them blocked. Perhaps there's something. This is a good way of visualizing the work. And by the way, this can be run on its own. Somebody can set up this process, and there's no Kanban master, if you will. And so here's some differences between the two that I've highlighted a little bit. In Scrum, you have somebody that needs to take on a Scrum Master role, a product owner role, and then you have the team. In Kanban, there's nothing like that. With the ceremonies, you have a daily Scrum, backlog refinement, sprint planning, sprint review, sprint retrospective. In Kanban, there's none of that. As changes come in Scrum, you have to wait for the next sprint. In Kanban, queued immediately, pulled in. Emergency request can be done right away. The work in progress controlled at the sprint level context. In Kanban, it's controlled at the workflow state. There's estimation done in Scrum. In Kanban, there's not. Let me jump to here.
So Rob, I had just a question. It sounds like you know, when in the Scrum process, is better if there needs to be orchestration, right? So you know, a bunch of tasks that have dependencies on each other probably doesn't make as much sense for a team to be just grabbing those. Whereas if the tasks are fairly independent, it seems like Kanban would probably work a little bit more in that kind of an environment.
Yeah, that's exactly true. It's hard to describe dependencies in items in Kanban. In Scrum, you can start to do that. You can have epics they're broken down in stories that are broken down into tasks. So yeah, that's very true. Again, yeah, Kanban works well when they have support requests coming in from your field or from your customers, and they can be picked up and worked individually. So here's actual a Kanban board in Jira, where you have a backlog, development column, in progress, done, and so say I have a task selected in development, it's in progress, move it to here, move it to done, then you get to visualize the flow as it comes through. You could have an expedite column up here, a swim lane, if you will, expedite. So say there's a bug, I'll put that up here. I need to actually change. If I have a bug I need to fast track through, that's an emergency, you could specify that in this expedite swim lane. Anybody doing Kanban a little bit different than this?
And not right now, but this is Randy, Rob.
Yeah.
So far. But I was working with a team at Count for a while that was using Kanban, like you're showing here, in Jira. And basically our process was pretty much similar to a sprint, except we didn't actually create active sprints. So our organization was, by keeping the backlog organized, we'd have weekly meetings to refine the backlog and make sure that the right priorities were at the top of the backlog, and make sure that the team understood, you know, what should be at the top of the backlog and why, and was collaborating on, you know, figuring out who should take certain tasks, etc. So there was a lot of internal organization that happened. And we actually even had a person sort of playing a Scrum Master type role, facilitating organization and team communication without actually creating sprints. And it worked well for that team because the team was kind of in a support role, although not exactly. It was creating a sort of platform tools for the development teams. But I think it worked well for that team simply because the team was very self-directed. It was rare for somebody from the product side to actually attend those meetings, or a higher manager to attend those meetings. The team itself kind of was responsible for figuring out what its backlog was and how to organize it, and just sort of being more hands-on with the backlog itself and letting that backlog itself dictate what happened and when worked well.
Rob, at iTrade Network, we had a Kanban board that had a couple other columns on it. We had one for after it was done, it was then tested or validated, and then another column for deployed to production. And it wasn't archived until the story was actually in production. So we added a couple more columns, just different steps, but we used the same idea, and we used Post-its too.
Cool. Yeah, that's great examples of the team customizing the process to what works for them and trying it, right? In Kanban, there is no Scrum Master. That the process should run itself. And you can customize any of those columns that you like and call those statuses anything you'd like, right? Great, that's awesome. And now we can get into Scrumban, and what that really is a combination of Scrum and Kanban, where you'll have a team, but not any roles. You will have daily Scrum, but only sprint planning and review and retrospective if it's needed. No iterations, no sprints. And then changes are added as needed to the board. You control your work in progress, but there's no estimation done. And you don't have a prioritized backlog in Scrumban, according to what the Agile Alliance advocates. You just write these cards just in time as they come in, and the teams can be specialized. So here is another example of taking Kanban and changing it to add in some of the principles of Scrum. I would say that in order for a process to happen, somebody does need to take the lead and initiate it, say, I'd like to see a change. I'd like to, and this is why. And then discuss that with the team. And if the team's on board, then it can fall to that person to organize a process and document it so that everybody understands what it is and leads the team through that. And then if it's Kanban, in a Kanban board, you set it up and then you walk away and let it run on its own. Now, if you want to throw in a sprint retrospective or a retrospective, it's your process, you choose, right? So now I want to get into these other ideas of your own creation. I'm a big advocate of Mike Cohn. He's an Agilist and a Scrum trainer. I read many of his books. I read his newsletter, and that he puts out every week, and he's got some fantastic practical advice. We've learned to take an iterative and an incremental approach to developing products, and we also need to apply that same lesson as we adopt and improve at being agile, and whatever that is you want to call it. Scrum, Kanban, Scrumban, or your own thing, your own process. Because there's two problems that result when teams are too frequently told what to do. Teams feel less ownership of their process and product, and there's less experimentation going on. If there's a better way of doing something, it might never be found. And I'd like to tell you a story from one of these newsletters that came out. I read this story back in January from Mike Cohn, and he talks about this investment. Years ago, he had an opportunity to be an early investor in a new chain of restaurants in Colorado. And at that time, the founder had opened 3 successful locations, had plans for expansion into hundreds more. Mike Coney loved the food. He'd been a frequent diner there, and he was excited to have the chance to invest. Although he hesitated because he didn't know anything about running a restaurant. He liked the menu. He didn't necessarily, he didn't know if everybody would like it. So he hemmed and hawed. Then the founder sent out a monthly email to investors that he started reading. In one of those emails, the founder of these restaurants, he said he had selected a new site for a restaurant, probably the 10th in the chain. What caught his attention was this quote this in the email from the founder. The location is probably too far from the local college, and college students are an important demographic for us. And I think this restaurant will be too small. So this place is too far from his key audience, probably too small. But this founder was opening one anyway. So Mike wrote the check and invested that day. The founder had a willingness to experiment. That was the deciding factor for him in his investment. He had theories about his business, but rather than leave them to assumptions, he tested them. Spending money to open a location, he might not think. He thought it might not work, but better to learn while the business was small, rather than learn it later. There's a fail fast principle here. So Mike finishes, I'm thinking about this now because there are a few experiments I need to try in my business. The things that will help me learn how I can better serve my clients. So are there experiments that you're putting off on your projects? Finding a way to experiment in ways that will validate your assumptions is an important step in succeeding with Agile. So think about that. Think about what are some of your things that you've thought about, changes in your business, which is process oriented. Just like you try a new product, you can try process change, and you'll never know until you experiment. And those experimentations can come in a retrospective. Anyone can call a retrospective, and can call it just a gathering and say, hey, I'm seeing some things that just don't work, or I want to try something new, and run an experiment. He advocates that experimenting with Agile, take it on for 2 iterations before judging it. So that might be 4 weeks, and then iterate off of that. Try those things on that that you might have been nervous to have done before, because there is no Scrum police. There's nobody there issuing that ticket, and you could have a 10-person team or a 2-person team, and you'll run into those people that will say, this isn't Scrum, but that's okay. Just dare to encourage experimentation. Encourage your product owner to participate in daily scrums. Be prepared for someone to tell you that this isn't Scrum. Try having the Scrum Master and the product owner be the same thing. That's okay. Just experiment and see how that works, because you might find something better. So what wanted to pause and ask, what experiments have anybody in this group, what have they tried that worked or did not work?
Well, one thing we did, we tried experimenting with our scrums with our team in India. This is back a previous company. And we kept scheduling them when they were traveling, okay? And it never did work. We had some Scrum Masters and some of the principals that really wanted to understand what was going on at that time. And we could not arrange a time where everyone's schedule was working. So we wound up having 2 scrums, one for the US side and one for the India side. And it wasn't the best, but they didn't have the willingness to have meetings at 10 o'clock at night on either side. So that's what we wound up doing. It was an accommodation.
Did it work, Joel?
For a while, and then it didn't, because the principals felt disconnected. The U.S. principals felt disconnected from what the folks in India were doing. Eventually, the project was canceled, so it became a moot point. And I don't know if they lost interest because they knew the project was going to be canceled in the future, or if that was prescient, or if they were just not interested. I don't know. The whole project was canceled about 4 months or 5 months after that happened.
I've seen a lot of experiments like that have worked and have not worked, especially in a geographically dispersed arrangement, right? You have your team in India and in the US or 12 hours apart. So one of the things that we'll do for a daily scrum, if we'll choose to meet our evening, their morning, or their morning, our evening. And or if that's not working, we'll have or say you have, a lot of times you have these smaller teams, right, that meet and work on certain things. So you could have a Scrum in Slack where you put out the updates, like what you did last time, what you're doing now, and any impediments. The key is communication, right?
And that's what we did for the most part. I was kind of the acting Scrum Master on that. So I just did everything via chat with the folks in India. Yeah, as you said, there has to be a willingness to accommodate the time and schedules. It's not always easy.
Yeah, I think in this new online world, work from home, there are those things that you can try on. You can try new communication channels. You can try new ways of working.
Rob, I was going to jump in and give an example where in my past, I was involved in some teams where we had some pretty large, if you would, projects, software programs that were going to take 12 months or more, and we were trying to evolve towards a more agile process, and yet as part of a large organization that's trying to deliver a complex product, other groups needed to know, when things would be delivered, right? So marketing needs to know what's this product capability going to be 18 months from now, and they need their marketing materials in place. And so that was kind of an interesting dilemma in terms of how do you operate in an agile manner, and yet also be able to commit to other groups in terms of what is going to be delivered in a certain period of time. So that was a case where we had to do a little bit of, as opposed to, I think you called this Scrumban. We had to do a little bit of waterfall, yep, as well as Scrum together to kind of have an overall schedule in place, and yet be able to manage the project in an agile manner as we were executing the software development.
Yeah, and this is an example too, right? If you pulled together and you created a process that worked for you.
Right. And I think the epics is a great way to look at that, is that, you can put together epics and not necessarily need to get into the details of each of the epics, so long as you know that you have a timeline around which you have to deliver, a number of epics to a larger program.
Yeah, there's definitely, in fact, Mike Cohn has a book about release planning that he goes in and he talks about, like, what do you want for your roadmap, and then start to write epics and estimate those epics in more larger categories, less finely grained. So an extra large, medium, small, and then try to put some time estimates around that from a large perspective. And then from the epics, you can break down into stories that become populated into sprints, and you can start to do multiple sprints, planning over multiple sprints. And so, yeah, a great example of how in a traditional waterfall method, waterfall style, you still need to have a commitment and a roadmap and a release plan, but then how do you get that into your Scrum process? So yeah, great example. Anybody else would like to share about experiments that they've run, or maybe violations of Scrum? And maybe when you got a Scrum ticket from the Scrum police.
I guess I can jump in there. I don't know if it's a violation from the Scrum police per se, which I'm totally stealing because I love that. But I've found in projects where we're dependent on other development teams to provide either databases or APIs and that kind of data, we try to write our user stories and accommodate for that, but we have to be somewhat flexible because we can't control the delivery of those items from the other teams, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally does.
And I joke that sometimes I call it the reverse requirements gathering process because I know I need them and I write the story, but we can't pull that story in to a sprint, if that makes sense. But I have found that if we write the story and size it to what we think it's going to be, we're coming out on our timeline still relatively close.
Mhm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's hard to fit a project into a nice implementation of Scrum, like following Scrum to a T. It doesn't exist. It's hard, rarely exists. It's hard to do, right? Because we have so many things in the real world that get in the way, and yet we still can follow principles and adapt the practice to suit our needs, and experiment, give it a try for a couple sprints, see how it works, get back together in a retrospective. Yeah, thanks, Holly. That's great. Any other examples that you'd want to share when maybe you got called out by the Scrum police, or you dared to raise an idea to experiment? I have one that I wanted to share, and it's I'll withhold the names of the guilty and the innocent. And this was a process that was Scrum to begin with, and then it changed into Kanban principles, and then it also changed into Scrumban. And that evolution was over several months, and it took a leader to step forward and say, this isn't working for several reasons that I see. And he also gathered input from others on the team. And then he put forward a process that he proposed that was, and this was a large team, 30 developers. But also he wanted to have a more fluid way of pulling work in, prioritizing them, because so many requests would come in from the business, from different areas of the business. Like, we need this feature, we need that feature, we need it right away. And you want to say, sorry, you got to wait for the next sprint in the next 2 weeks. But when a VP says, well, I need that right now, that doesn't work, right? And so as he developed this process, he engaged the team and got them to buy in and to contribute to this process. And I do remember this one altercation during a stand-up. And it was this one engineer. There always seems to be sometimes that one person that objects at everything. Just like I comes up with reason after reason. And maybe that's sometimes human nature gets in the way, right? And at the same time, this manager said, I want to try this, and then you can tell me in the next sprint or the next sprint after that, when we have a retrospective, what you think. But we're going to try this. That was needed in the moment, because this objecting, this voice was starting to provide discord and disengagement in the team. And also they needed to go forward and try new things to deliver. And at that, that could have gone in a very bad way. That discontent, that discord, that could have derailed the project, the process, the change in the process. And yet that manager stepped forward and said, let's give it a try. Are you with me on that? Can we just try that? And things really started to improve in the speed of delivery of the team. And that's what it takes at times, somebody to step forward and say, we're going to take this hill, we're going to try this, and we want to experiment, and then the results will tell us if we're successful or not. All right, any last comments from the group? I want to highlight what's coming next. So Holly was just commented about the APIs and dependencies, and she and Jeff Walker come from Access Idaho, and the next Spark presentation on May 8th will talking about how do you adapt your process to your business. Well, this will be a continuing conversation. But she's got a story to tell that's specifically around how a small office goes from in-person daily stand-ups to Zoom daily stand-ups in 4 days. COVID-19 hits, right? How to maintain your company culture in a Zoom world. And so I wanted to highlight that, because that's in the next Spark presentation. Holly will present on that. And Holly, did you want to call out anything else?
I don't think so at this time. I took some notes off of your presentation to kind of build off. So this has been fantastic, and we can continue it.
Great. That's awesome. You know, yeah, we'll see what happens after COVID-19 as this pandemic subsides. And like, will we go back to the way we were doing things, or will we keep some of our things? And I know that we will keep some of the things because they've worked better, and we wouldn't have been put in this place if this had not happened, right? We were had to be a forcing function, had to be COVID-19 where we couldn't be in the office talking to each other, and also now we were forced to experiment, and now we've experimented. We see some things that working really well virtually and at home that when we go back to the office we're going to keep. And so this is your opportunity to do that.
Hey Rob, this is Jeff. Real quick, out of curiosity, kind of, I know it's kind of early on in this process, but did you discover anything different due to the COVID change and the way you work with your teams, or was it really seamless? I guess, is there any lessons learned or anything that stood out that, or even unexpected, like, hey, I didn't expect this to be an outcome because I thought we had already established our processes and we did something new, or is it stable? Can you give a kind of sense of that?
That's a great question. So we operate already in a very geographically dispersed arrangement, our teams in India. And so we're in Zoom calls all the time with our India counterparts. We're operating out of Jira, all online. What we noticed was when we went to all work from home, that was for us fairly seamless, but yet also we had some struggle with that arrangement, like always stuck in their home and not going out. And so people would tend to work longer and get heads down and forget about going outside and taking a break. And so some people would set alarms. Some people would have their pets there to help them, remind them to go outside. And so what we also saw was productivity levels in some places went up because they were able to focus. And then also collaboration, on the other hand, went down. And so one of the things that we're thinking about doing when we go back is how to get the best of both worlds, the collaboration together in the same office. And also that collaboration has to happen for us virtually with our teams in India. And we do have offices in Portland and Sacramento that we work with. But also what we've noticed is that when we're able to work from home, and we might be doing that occasionally when we go back, have a work from home day for those that can do that. We are able to really focus and deliver and have this uninterrupted time. And then maybe we need to even experiment with, like, how do we do that virtually? Like, how do we say, hey, I need some time in Zoom or in Slack, whatever channels we use. Like, how do we go after that? So those are some of the things that we've noticed. Any other comments from my In-Time Tech colleagues that you guys want to jump in?
Hey, Rob, this is Jeff again. I just to build on what you're saying, I think one of the classic questions that I'm going to have coming out of this, and we may talk next week on, is how do we hold on the good things we learned during this? Because the classic one, go back to your old routine. What is it that you can build on? What does you remember? And so the classic question is, we've pivoted, we've gone through this, and how do you, once you establish a new routine, not just fall back upon old habits? And so I think one of the questions, again, it's still early to tell, is the challenge is moving forward with the good things and remembering to move forward and practicing and being consistent on that, rather than saying, well, it's all done, it's all behind us. So I think just thinking out loud, thinking forward, I know that's going to be a challenge to hold on to the positives that come out as you talk about culture change.
Yeah, and what we like to do is we like to call a retrospective and ask, what's been working well, what could be working better, and that the principle there is talking about it, right? Meeting together, and in our virtual happy hour, we have sharing. We have people talk about what's working and what's not working through their week, working from home. And so as we go back into the office, hopefully sometime this summer, we need to talk about that. Like, what are those best practices that we want to keep? And then talk about it again a week or two later. Like, are we keeping that? Be very intentional about talking about what worked and holding on to it, and then talk later, like, are we holding on to it? Because if you don't, then things tend to go back, right? If people don't talk about it, we can tend to go back.
Yeah, one of the things I'm finding is, while we're 100% remote, it gives me a better understanding of what it means to be remote, and it puts everyone on I think the same playing field in terms of how we show up in our contribution into a meeting. Whereas when it's 10 people in a room and 3 people remote, you tend to, in the room, take for granted what it's like to be remote. And I think that's something that I think needs to be continually brought forward, is how do you get to the best of both worlds, right? So you think about what's it called, Scrumban, which is kind of like, how do we do Scrum planning and yet have some of the ability to deal with things that come in really quickly in a Kanban process. And that's similar here is, when you're working with remote teams, how do you make sure that everyone feels like they're on the same page, the same playing field, and have the same ability to contribute into the meeting and make everyone feel like they're part of it, as opposed to, okay, I'm just kind of peripheral because I'm remote. And that's a key thing for me is I think that right now the meetings with remote attendees are more effective because everyone's on the same playing field. I remember doing some experiments, where we went 100% virtual, even though we didn't need to. And that seemed like maybe too restrictive. But that's a question for me going forward, is how do we make meetings as effective as possible when some people are in the same room and some people are remote.
Yeah, that's great. It's been an equalizing, has an equalizing effect. Yeah. Any other sharing? Okay. So looking forward to May 8th, Holly and Jeff talking about their journey. And everybody has a journey, right? Everybody has a story, and we can learn from those stories and those journeys and see how we can apply them, principles, little nuggets that we learn from them. And so they have a story I'm really looking forward to hearing. So May 8th is when that will be. David, back to you. You're on mute, David. Maybe David stepped away.
Sorry, I had it on mute. I use 2 mutes. I have the mic set up here, and so I have a little volume control, and I muted myself on here. I don't normally do that. That was amazing, Rob. I really appreciate it. I think there was a lot of good talk. Paul, you mentioned too, something that I've always been interested in is the kind of division between remote workers when they're wholly remote, and there's a team that's not remote. Oftentimes there's that decisive line where you're not part of the team really, it feels that way anyway. You know, there might be conversations that happen before, you know, the Zoom meeting gets started, and then you're kind of left. So I think this is a learning lesson for everybody. And I definitely am looking forward to May 8th. We're going to have that up on Eventbrite shortly. And I hope that everybody had an easy time with the Eventbrite ICS file process. Were there any issues with that? Just open it up for any feedback real quick.
It worked great for me.
Yeah. Everything's good. Awesome. Okay. So we're experimenting with this all too, with the Idaho Tech Council, trying to keep everything rolling in this. So we'll do it again. May 8th, we'll keep the same time. It seems like this worked out pretty well for a lot of people, and look for that registration coming up. If you want to check the YouTube, there is a link to it. It's still obviously recording right now, but that'll be available on the YouTube channel. Definitely encourage anybody to subscribe to the YouTube channel too. We'll have that and other things as well. And probably a lot more content in this COVID situation. So yeah, I appreciate everybody. Thank you so much. And I hope everybody comes back on May 8th to the Spark series.